The metal doors of the prison slid open, and a soldier stepped inside. She was the last person anyone would expect to find on an Empire warship. Barefoot, bloodied, and bound in the harshest chains, she was the embodiment of defiance. But what truly terrified her captors wasn't her physical condition. It was the calm in her eyes. She wasn't human. She was something far worse. The Galactic Empire's elite soldiers had captured a lone human, one who had earned a reputation across the galaxy that sent chills down the spines of the most hardened mercenaries. Her name was spoken only in whispers, as if saying it aloud might invoke her wrath. They called her Baba Yaga, but the Empire didn't believe in legends. And to them, a human soldier was little more than a pawn in the Grand War. They had no idea that the woman before them, shackled and bleeding, was not just any soldier. She was the manifestation of death itself. The ship's commander, General Drax, stood in the center of the cold, sterile interrogation room, his arms crossed. His sharp, calculating eyes never left her. He had expected this moment to be easier. This mission had been supposed to be nothing more than a routine capture. A high-profile enemy soldier, an easy interrogation, and the information she held about Earth's military capabilities would be theirs. Instead, all he saw was a calm, unbroken woman who hadn't made a sound since her capture. No pleas, no cries, no sign of fear. Report, Drax snapped to his subordinate, a young officer standing at attention beside him. General, we've tried everything. Psychological probes, enhanced interrogation techniques. Nothing works. She refuses to speak. She doesn't even flinch when we shock her with the highest voltage. Drax frowned, irritation flickering in his icy expression. She's human. She has to break eventually. The officer hesitated, his eyes darting to the woman, then back to the general. Sir, she just doesn't seem human. I've seen soldiers, mercenaries even. But he trailed off. Drax's gaze hardened. He was a man who valued certainty above all, and the uncertainty gnawing at the edges of this situation was starting to irritate him. The woman didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the conversation happening around her. She simply sat there, her posture eerily straight despite the restraints, her eyes watching them with an unsettling calm. It was as though she didn't even see the soldiers as threats. She didn't need to. She already knew what they would do next. Bring her to the interrogation chamber, Drax commanded. His voice was sharp, but there was a hint of anticipation beneath it. His men had assured him that breaking her would be a matter of time. Yet, something inside him itched with unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, this human, was something far worse than he could comprehend. The officers moved quickly, unlocking her chains and guiding her down the narrow hallway. She didn't resist, but neither did she comply. She walked with the same unsettling grace, a predator in a sheep's skin. No sign of fear, no sign of weakness. Drax followed behind them, his mind racing. He'd been in countless battles, fought against creatures with claws, fangs, and technology far superior to anything the humans had developed. Yet, there was something about this soldier that unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. He'd heard the rumors, of course, whispers from the far reaches of the galaxy. A mercenary soldier who never left survivors. A killer who had earned a reputation that made even the most fearsome warriors think twice before crossing her. But that was all it was, rumors. Nothing more than stories told in hushed voices to make the weak feel better about their own inadequacies. But now, as the woman passed him without a glance, he couldn't help but wonder, had the Empire made a mistake in capturing her? Or had they just unleashed something far more dangerous than they ever anticipated? Prepare the room, Drax muttered to himself, forcing the unease from his mind. We break her. We make her talk. But deep down he knew, this woman, this soldier, was not going to be so easily defeated. And they had no idea what they were truly up against. The interrogation room was sterile, the walls lined with glowing panels that cast an unnatural light over the scene. General Drax stood at the observation window, watching through a series of holographic monitors as his officers readied the room. Inside, the human soldier, Baba Yaga, sat, still bound in chains, but eerily composed. Drax had seen this before, a prisoner, broken by the relentless pressure of his empire's methods. But this woman, she was different. Even the most resilient minds had a breaking point. They all did. Everyone did. He'd been told she was a mere human, just another soldier, another pawn to play in the Empire's grand conquest. But nothing about this felt normal. There was a coldness to her demeanor, a terrifying calm that he couldn't understand. He leaned in closer to the monitor, scrutinizing her every movement. She sat perfectly still, her eyes dark but watchful, as if she were waiting for something. "Are we ready?" Drax asked, his voice low but commanding. One of his officers nodded. "Yes, General. The neural disruptors are in place, and the psychological probes are calibrated. She won't last long." The sound of the door sliding open cut through the tension, and the officer gestured for Baba Yaga to be brought in. She was escorted by 2 armed guards, her hands shackled tightly, but there was no sign of struggle. Her feet barely made a sound against the cold floor, a silent reminder of the unnatural control she held over herself. Once she was seated in the center of the room, the guard stepped back, and the door clicked shut behind them. The air in the room seemed to thicken, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. General Drax stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, and observed her through the glass. "You must understand the position you're in, soldier. You've been captured by the might of the Galactic Empire. Your resistance, your silence, will not save you." Baba Yaga didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge his words. Her eyes were fixed on a point in the distance, as if she were somewhere far away, not present in the same room as him. "Prepare the probes," Drax ordered. One of the officers moved swiftly, placing a neural device on Baba Yaga's head. It was a standard interrogation tool designed to break even the toughest minds. The officer connected it to the control panel, and within seconds, the soldier's body stiffened. Drax watched with cold satisfaction as the machine hummed to life. "Now let's see if we can uncover the truth," he muttered. The device sent pulses of electric energy into Baba Yaga's mind, designed to disrupt her neural pathways, to break her memories and force her to reveal what she knew about Earth's defenses. For a moment, her body twitched, but still, there was no sound, no scream, no cry for mercy. General Drax frowned. He'd been briefed on her resistance to pain, but this was something else. The machine would have broken anyone else by now. "Increase the intensity," Drax barked, growing impatient. The officer complied, adjusting the settings. The pulses intensified, a sharp buzz filling the room as the energy coursed through Baba Yaga's mind. Still nothing. Not a word, not a sound. The general's patience began to wear thin. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice hard. "I'm not like those backwater criminals you've been dealing with. I'll break you." Baba Yaga's lips curled into a slight, unsettling smile. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear over the machine's hum. "You can't break me." Drax felt a cold shiver run down his spine. There was no defiance in her words, no anger, just a terrifying certainty. The officer paused, glancing at Drax, confusion etched on his face. "General, the device isn't working. Her neural patterns, they're not responding. It's as if she's blocking the signal." Drax snapped his gaze back to the soldier, disbelief creeping into his expression. "Block the signal?" He turned to the officer, fury in his eyes. "This is impossible. She's human." The officer took a step back, nervous. "I don't understand, General. It's never happened before." The soldier's eyes finally met Drax's. They were cold, unblinking, as if she had already seen his kind and found them wanting. "There's no breaking me," she repeated, louder this time. You're wasting your time." For a moment, the room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the low hum of the machine that was supposed to control her. Drax stood frozen, his mind racing as the implications of her words settled over him. They had underestimated her, underestimated humanity, and that was a mistake they would soon regret. General Drax paced the command room, frustration gnawing at his insides. His mission had been simple: capture a human soldier, break her, extract the intelligence needed to fortify their invasion of Earth. The Empire had dealt with countless prisoners before, all of them broken in time. But this was different. Baba Yaga sat in the interrogation chamber, still unyielding, still unmoved by every method they had tried. Every psychological probe, every pulse of energy sent to break her mind, had failed. Her body was scarred, her hands shackled, yet there was something ancient in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even resistance. It was something else entirely. Drax stopped pacing and turned to the officer at his side. "What is she?" The words felt foreign in his mouth. He wasn't one to admit confusion. The officer hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "General, we've been studying her for hours. Her resilience, it's beyond anything I've encountered. She rejects every method. It's like she's trained for this." Drax's brow furrowed. Trained? She's a soldier, nothing more. But even as he said the words, doubt crept into his mind. This wasn't a normal human soldier. There was something primal about her, a deep-rooted knowledge of how to survive, how to fight back even when all seemed lost. He turned sharply and looked at the screens in front of him. Through the glass window, Baba Yaga was still sitting, calm and composed. Her hands rested in her lap, her posture regal in its stillness. No one could withstand this kind of pressure for long. And yet, she did. "Get me the commander of the 9th, Drax ordered. "And I want every piece of intel on this woman. Her background, her mercenary work, everything." The officer quickly relayed the message, and within moments, a new presence entered the command room, a seasoned military leader, his expression grim. The commander of the 9th was no stranger to warfare, and he had seen his fair share of brutal confrontations. But even he seemed uneasy under Drax's scrutiny. "I've read the reports, General. This one," the commander paused, shaking his head. "She's a ghost. A shadow. We've encountered her before, at least her handiwork. We didn't know her name then, but we know now. Baba Yaga. It's a legend." Drax felt the air in the room grow heavier. "A legend? She's a human soldier. What do you mean by that?" The commander exhaled slowly. "There are stories, General. The kind that circulate in the deepest corners of the galaxy. Tales of a woman, a force so deadly that entire squads of our finest soldiers have disappeared without a trace. No survivors. Not even a scrap of evidence left behind. This Baba Yaga, she's not just a mercenary. She's part of something older, something deadlier." Drax stared at the commander in disbelief. "Are you suggesting this is some kind of myth? A war story passed around like folklore?" "I don't know what it is," the commander replied, his voice low. "But the soldiers who went up against her said the same thing. They said she didn't fight like a person. She fought like something else. Something ancient." A sense of unease crept into Drax's chest. He had heard rumors in passing, whispers about an elite, ruthless soldier who operated outside the boundaries of conventional warfare. But he had dismissed them as mere exaggerations, fodder for the weak-minded. Now, those same rumors were staring him in the face. Drax's jaw tightened as he stared at Baba Yaga's calm, unbroken form on the screen. What if she was more than just a soldier? What if she was something else entirely? What if the humans had intentionally sent this woman as a test, a trial to see how far they could push the Empire before the entire facade crumbled? "You still don't understand," the commander continued, eyes darkening. "She's not just trained in combat. She's trained in survival at the most primal level. That's why she doesn't break. That's why you can't read her. She's an ancient force, General. She knows how to remain still, how to wait, and when she strikes, she does it with a vengeance. Drax turned away, pacing again, his mind racing. The mission had been meant to gather intel, break their enemy spirit, and then proceed with the conquest. But now it felt like the Empire was the one that was being tested. There was something about Baba Yaga that set her apart from any soldier he had ever encountered. Something that threatened to turn the tide of the war, even before it had truly begun. He stopped abruptly and faced the commander. I want her interrogated again. Step up the pressure. Nothing works, then we'll move to the next phase. The commander nodded, though his face remained grim. Just know this, General. You may be facing more than you bargained for. As Drax watched Baba Yaga, the weight of the situation began to sink in. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a storm. And soon, the Empire would find out what happens when you try to tame the ancient fury of a legend. The corridors of the prison ship were cold, the hum of the machinery punctuating the tense silence. General Drax stood at the center of the command deck, eyes fixed on the flickering hologram of Baba Yaga. Despite the increasingly desperate measures to break her, she remained unyielding, a silent enigma that had now become his obsession. The Empire's patience was running thin, and Drax knew that if he didn't succeed soon, his career, and perhaps his life, would be forfeit. But he wasn't about to let that happen. We need to escalate, Drax said, his voice low but resolute. Prepare the assassins. The officer at his side, Lieutenant Varos, looked up, brow furrowing. Assassins, sir? I thought we were going to use the neural disruptors again. Drax's eyes narrowed. The disruptors aren't working. We've tried everything, and we're running out of time. If she won't break by force, we'll need to make her fear something she can't outrun. He turned sharply, his gaze locking on the officer. Call in the Dread Hunters. They're the only ones who can get her to talk. Varos hesitated. The Dread Hunters were a legend in their own right, an elite group of assassins so ruthless and efficient that they were rumored to have taken down entire civilizations. For Drax to deploy them against a single prisoner, it spoke volumes about how far he was willing to go. Understood, General, Varos replied, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and fear. The Dread Hunters arrived within the hour, 3 masked figures, cloaked in black armor, their weapons gleaming with the promise of death. They were silent, as if they knew their presence alone was enough to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies. Drax welcomed them with the respect they were due, but there was no time for pleasantries. Your target is in the interrogation chamber, Drax said, motioning toward the large screen that displayed Baba Yaga's still form. She's locked in her cell, but she's proven unbreakable under normal conditions. I want you to eliminate the normal. Make her feel something, anything. The leader of the Dread Hunters, tall, silent, his face obscured by a black helmet, gave a slight nod. We will bring her to you, General. Or, we will die trying. With that, they moved, swift as shadows, leaving Drax alone in the command room. Inside the interrogation chamber, Baba Yaga sat, as she always did, still, her chains rattling faintly as she shifted her position. She had no fear, no panic. The fearlessness was what unnerved Drax the most. Humans were not supposed to be like this. They were supposed to break. But as the Dread Hunters entered, their dark figures looming over her, she finally moved. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Her eyes, cold and calculating, met the lead hunter's gaze. The silence between them stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Baba Yaga spoke. I know why you're here, she said, her voice low but resonant. You've been sent to kill me. The hunter didn't respond, instead stepping forward with a blade drawn, its edge gleaming in the dim light. The weapon, a curved and jagged thing, was designed to make quick work of its target. But Baba Yaga didn't flinch. She simply watched, her face an unreadable mask. I'm not afraid of you, she said again, her voice almost amused. The hunter lunged. In the blink of an eye, Baba Yaga's chains were gone. The rapidity of her movements stunned the hunter, who barely had time to react before she was on him, her body fluid, deadly. She twisted his arm with inhuman precision, disarming him and sending the blade clattering across the floor. The other two hunters moved in immediately, but they were too slow. Baba Yaga, with the brutal efficiency of a predator, dispatched the second hunter with a savage strike that left him crumpled on the floor. Her movements were fluid, a dance of death that no one could follow, not even the most seasoned assassins in the galaxy. The last hunter, realizing the futility of their mission, attempted to disengage, retreating to the far corner of the room. But Baba Yaga was already there, standing directly in front of him, her eyes locked onto his with the intensity of a storm. "You're not here to kill me," she whispered, her voice like ice. "You're here to see if you can?" The hunter froze, and for the first time since entering the room, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. In that moment, the illusion shattered. Baba Yaga was not some prisoner to be broken. She was a force, a living embodiment of death itself. She wasn't someone who feared death. She was death. The room fell into silence once more, the three assassins lying motionless on the floor, either unconscious or incapacitated by the sheer force of her attack. Outside the room, General Drax's face appeared on the monitor, his expression unreadable. "Bring her to me," he ordered, his voice colder than ever. As Baba Yaga was escorted out of the room, her chains reapplied, Drax watched with a mix of dread and grudging respect. She hadn't just defeated the Dread Hunters, she had dismantled their reputation in a matter of moments. This wasn't a woman. This was something far darker, something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And now he was certain of one thing: they had underestimated her. And they were about to pay the price, asterisk asterisk. The silence of the command room was deafening as General Drax stood in front of the large holographic screen, his eyes fixed on Baba Yaga's still form as she was escorted back to her cell. The Dread Hunters, those legendary assassins, symbols of death, had failed. And not only had they failed, but they had been utterly humiliated. Their bodies had been discarded without ceremony, left as evidence of their failure. Drax's fingers twitched at his side, betraying the frustration that simmered beneath his calculated exterior. He had brought the Empire's most feared assassins into play, and they had been defeated by a single human. A woman who, up until now, had been nothing more than a name to him. But after watching her dismantle those trained killers with cold, methodical precision, Drax had come to a chilling realization. This was not just a soldier. Baba Yaga was an enigma, a force beyond his understanding. And she was not the one who would bend or break. It was the Empire that was in danger of snapping under the weight of her resolve. "She's not just resisting," Drax muttered, as if speaking to the empty room. "She's waiting." Lieutenant Varos stood nearby, his voice cautious. "Sir, we've tried everything. The Dread Hunters, the neural disruptors. We've even pressed her with threats. But she refuses to speak, refuses to break. We're at a standstill." Drax's lips tightened. He had underestimated her, and now he had no choice but to rethink his approach. He needed to understand who she truly was, how a mere human could be so impenetrable, so unyielding. "Bring me the archives on her," Drax ordered. "Everything. Every scrap of data on Baba Yaga, her missions, her history. I want to know what we're dealing with. And I want it now." The officer scurried to comply, pulling up files on the holographic screen. Reports of her mercenary work filled the air, small skirmishes, covert operations, and her inexplicable ability to leave no survivors. The data was disjointed, fragmented, as though her past had been carefully hidden. Each report hinted at a truth that no one dared speak outright. Baba Yaga was not a mere mercenary. She was something more. As the files flickered, a pattern began to emerge, one that sent a chill down Drax's spine. Baba Yaga had been active for decades, moving between different systems, always one step ahead of the authorities. She had fought in wars that the Empire had only heard rumors about, wars so brutal that entire species had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. She was a myth in the making, a living legend that left only fear and whispers in her wake. Drax narrowed his eyes, his heart pounding. There was no human military that could produce a soldier like this. No army that could train someone to be so ruthlessly efficient, so immune to the methods that had worked on thousands of others. The conclusion was unavoidable. "She's not one of ours," Drax said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "She's been trained by something else. Someone else." Varos stepped closer, his voice uncertain. "But General, what could have trained her to be like this? This isn't something any regular soldier could endure." Drax shook his head, the pieces falling into place. "No, this isn't training. This is survival. She's been forged through something far older, something more primal. She's not just fighting for her life. She's fighting for something else. A purpose beyond anything we can comprehend." For the first time since the capture, Drax felt a stirring of doubt. The interrogation had become a test of wills, a battle of endurance. Baba Yaga wasn't interested in answers. She was testing them, pushing the Empire to see how far it could go before it broke. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to see who would bend first. And for the first time, Drax realized he wasn't in control anymore. "Prepare her for the next phase," Drax ordered, his voice hardening. "We'll escalate once more." But as he said it, he knew it wouldn't matter. No interrogation, no force, no weapon the Empire possessed could break her. Baba Yaga was beyond all of it. She was the storm on the horizon, and the Empire was the ship caught in her path. Outside the command room, Baba Yaga remained in her cell, waiting. She didn't know what the Empire would throw at her next. But she didn't need to. She was already several steps ahead. This was a game of patience, and she had time on her side. Time. And a past that none of them could even begin to understand. The Empire had underestimated her. They thought they could control her. But in the end, Baba Yaga wasn't the one who would be controlled. She was the one who would bring the Empire to its knees. And they would never see it coming. The tremor in the Empire's command ship was barely perceptible. But to General Drax, it felt like a seismic shift. The walls, the floors, the very air around him seemed to vibrate with a force he couldn't quite explain. His instincts screamed that something was coming, something that would shatter everything the Empire had worked so hard to build. He stared at the monitors, his hands clenched behind his back. Baba Yaga's cell, once fortified with the most advanced security measures the Empire had to offer, was now silent. She had been subjected to their highest-grade interrogations, every conceivable method of coercion and intimidation. Yet, she remained as calm as the eye of a storm, unbroken, unyielding. She had no fear, no desperation. She had only patience, and that patience had been wearing down the Empire's resolve, piece by piece. Drax turned sharply to his lieutenant. "Report." Varos, who had been monitoring the prison systems, seemed to hesitate. "General, the cell systems are malfunctioning. Power fluctuations, grid failures. Everything's going offline. It's like someone's overriding the system." "Impossible," Drax muttered. "The highest security protocols are in place." "I know, sir. But it's happening." A low hum filled the room, growing louder as the tremor intensified. Drax's heart quickened. He moved quickly to the command console, his fingers flying over the keys, calling up diagnostics. The ship was on high alert. Red lights flashed across the walls, and automated systems began to warn of breaches. A sharp sound broke through the tension, the unmistakable clang of metal on metal. The tremor had evolved into something more. It was no longer just a malfunction. It was an eruption. Drax's eyes darted to the screen showing Baba Yaga's cell. The thick, reinforced doors had been torn from their hinges, as if they were made of paper. She was no longer there. The only sign of her presence was the ruin she had left in her wake. Drax's breath caught. What in the hell? Before he could finish, the doors to the command room flew open with a violent crash, and there, standing in the doorway, was Baba Yaga. She was covered in blood, some of it her own, but mostly the blood of the guards who had been too slow to react. The black armor that had been placed on her had been torn to pieces, her chains snapped in a single motion. Her eyes burned with a ferocity that sent a cold wave of dread down Drax's spine. Baba Yaga stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate, as though she was savoring the chaos that she had unleashed. She wasn't just free. She was a force unleashed, a predator set loose upon its prey. The dread hunters had failed. The neural disruptors had failed. Now, the Empire's finest soldiers were scattered in pools of their own blood, either incapacitated or dead. And yet, Baba Yaga was untouched. "You thought you could control me," she said, her voice low and like ice. "But you've made a grave mistake." Drax stood frozen for a moment, struggling to process the sight before him. The woman who had been bound, chained, and tortured was now an unstoppable force of destruction. His mind raced through the possibilities. How had she done it? What was she? She was no longer a prisoner. She was a weapon, a living nightmare that the Empire had no means of controlling. "You won't get away with this," Drax finally said, his voice a mixture of fear and anger. Baba Yaga's smile was cold, almost predatory. "I'm not going anywhere." "You are." Before Drax could react, she moved. Faster than humanly possible, she closed the distance between them, grabbing him by the throat with a vice-like grip. Her strength was unreal, far beyond any human soldier he had ever encountered. He tried to struggle, tried to break free, but her grip tightened, and his breath came in shallow gasps. Her eyes locked onto his unblinking, as if she were studying him, as if his life hung in the balance only because she allowed it. "You think you're in control," she whispered. "But you're not. You never were." The room spun as Drax's vision began to blur. He gasped for air, his body trembling under her grasp, but his mind refused to yield. He had seen too many deaths, too many battles, to go down like this. His hand reached for his weapon, but before he could even grasp it, Baba Yaga's other hand shot out, effortlessly breaking his wrist. A scream tore from his throat, but she didn't flinch. "You wanted to know what I am?" Baba Yaga said, her voice cold as the void. "I am the thing that humans, like you, fear most. I am the reckoning." And just like that, with a brutal twist, Drax's world went black. As his body crumpled to the floor, Baba Yaga stood over him, her chest rising and falling steadily. She wasn't just a soldier. She was the embodiment of something far older, far more dangerous, a legend that had long been buried beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when the Empire's arrogance would finally awaken it. And now, the galaxy would know her name. Baba Yaga was unleashed. The Empire's war was over,